Well, hey everyone, I'm Brandon Beck, and it's great to be here at D.I.C.E again. I'm a first-time speaker here, and I gotta say that being backstage gave me a little feeling of deja vu, and I've got a confession to make. So, in the early days of Riot, going back to '07, '08, I believe, we were sort of a wee company, about a dozen of us, and a couple of us came here to D.I.C.E, and we were looking to drum up interest in a publishing deal. And when you're a small developer, the cost of these badges isn't particularly cheap, right? So we had to improvise, and by improvise, I mean essentially we used to sneak in. And we were constantly worried that we'd be found out, or we'd somehow be asked to leave. And we actually did have some close calls. And what's ironic is I'm now on the board here, and I haven't shared this with my board members, but when you're on stage here, some of that imposter feeling can come rushing back. So I figured I would come clean. And that's also part of why we're pushing to sort of help out and sponsor and augment the scholarship program and sort of aim it at small developers who are just like us, and so they can kind of show up at this great show and badge up the classy way. But alas, I'm not here to talk about sneaking into trade shows. That'd be a fun topic, but I'm gonna share some kind of core beliefs that my co-founder Marc Merrill and I have evolved over our life as a startup. And if you get a feeling of deja vu yourself, maybe because you've heard me beat this drum before, but it's super important to me. And before I get into this stuff, since most of you don't know me, I want to talk about where I'm coming from. So like many of us here, I'm a lifelong, passionate gamer, and my tastes in games are pretty broad, but my core is really rooted in multiplayer experiences. So the more social, the more competitive, the better. And my favorite game of all time, even to this day, is it might surprise you, but it's a pair of MUDs called Gemstone and Dragon Realms, right? As a kid, I was just mesmerized by the gorgeous aesthetic here. They're dropping light blue, a little bit of green when people are saying stuff. No, but there's something incredibly immersive about MUDs, and it's hard to explain if you weren't a MUDder, but the strength of the community, it's kind of like reading the book, and augment that with a strong community. I've got relationships now for 20 years that started in these games, including some colleagues that I now work with today. But MUDs kind of led to MMOs, and then outside MMOs, just give me anything with a ladder, and I'm stoked. So RTS games like StarCraft, Warcraft, a bunch of shooter games, and these days, as you can imagine, currently playing a ton of League. I was ranked gold last season, but it's starting to feel like my skill ceiling a little bit. That said, I refuse to throw in the towel. Recently went back to Hearthstone for the GVG update, and I got sucked back into constructed ranked. Legend still eludes me, but I'm working on it. How many of you guys play Hearthstone, by the way? Okay, a lot of hands. That's awesome. They're nominated for a bunch of stuff tomorrow, and I think it's super well deserved. And it's been a great game. And speaking of Blizzard, by the way, perhaps to the detriment of my marriage, I've been sucked back into to the Draenor expansion, but it's been totally worth it. Great dungeons, great encounters. The Blizzard team just did an awesome job. And I got to give a shout out to CS:GO. Counter-Strike is one of those games that I and probably many of you here have been playing for 15 years now, I think. Going back to beta and through 1.6 and Source and now to Go, and it's fun to be like legitimately hooked in a game that I've been playing for so long and so many years. And I'm not the only one. So these are the Steam stats around how the game is doing, and it's remarkable. CS:GO came out like 2.5 years ago, and they're basically month over month smashing their performance. And for me, it was just a subtle change. It was the addition of sort of 5-on-5 ranked play. So playing this game with, playing CS as a team of 5 against a team of 5 in a competitive fashion is such an interesting experience. Team play matters, your positioning matters, your location matters, taking initiative and communication, all those things come together, and they make a difference relative to sort of the traditional PUG experience when we hop into dedicated servers and we don't quite know what round it is or who's on our team, and we're kind of just playing for our own KD. And back in the day, if you wanted to organize or simulate this kind of experience, you kind of had to meet up on IRC and do your best to recruit people. So anyway, Valve made this easy, and it's super awesome, so kudos to that team. And before I get off the topic of games, I just got to quickly shout out tabletop games, because tabletop gaming is awesome right now. I mean, there's like a legitimate renaissance happening here. And in game design and a bunch of things, and we're just on the cusp of it. I mean, we're years away from 3D printing, being pretty ubiquitous, and programmable playmats, and I think it's going to be amazing. I think a talk just on that topic would be fun on its own. But in keeping with the theme of this year's D.I.C.E, as Martin was talking about, which is really about busting the borders and barriers that get in the way of the art and the business of making games, I want to circle back to a topic that's near and dear to my heart, which is really the incredible, smart, talented people that really include most of us in this room, who dedicate their lives to this awesome craft, right? And it's really simple. People, right? People, that's it. The holy grail of game development, summed up in one word. And before I dive into this topic, I'd love to just survey the room and get a sense for kind of who's sort of already with me on this. So just going to ask for a quick show of hands, but who in this audience believes, without a shred of doubt, that nothing, not technology, not IP, not patents, not trademarks, not brands, not relationships, not any asset of a game company is worth more than to our company's success than the quality of our teams? If you believe that without a shred of doubt, raise your hand. Okay, a lot of hands. That is awesome. Now, raise your hand if that sounds idealistic, you believe it in your heart, you want to believe it, but your mind is just kind of full of questions. Those other things are pretty important. Okay, good. We're pretty sure of this, which is great. Now, lastly, raise your hand if your company, your shareholders, your boardrooms all believe this and internalize it the same way you do without a shred of doubt. Okay, a lot less hands. Now, this is where I think we have a problem as an industry. Because until we all agree, until all stakeholders fully believe in the value of our people, then we struggle to prioritize what really matters. And it's going to hold us back as an industry from our full potential. And I want to briefly acknowledge sort of how this problem is manifesting today. So for starters, as an industry, we're underperforming in compensation, in some cases by a lot, relative to the average software engineer in tech. We underinvest in learning and development programs. Right? We struggle to provide great long-term career paths, and we're infamous for burnout. Right? Why? Is it because games are sort of struggling to catch on in the broader media landscape? No. Games are kicking ass, right? Our industry is kicking ass. It's priorities. And the sooner we prioritize people more aggressively, the more we drive innovation and bust through the barriers that we have as an industry. So with this talk, I'm going to try to do two things. I'm going to essentially try to make the case for why we should be prioritizing our people efforts. And I'm also going to just share some stories and our own lessons learned, mostly the hard way, I might add. So if we break down a game company into our core assets, right, there's a few things. For one, there's technology. So tech is a pretty big bucket for us, right? And we don't build tech for tech's sake, right? But engineering is almost always required to bring our games to life, right? And software doesn't have standalone value. It's only as good as the people who actually maintain it and evolve it, right? Because it's so rapidly obsolete. And don't get me started on patents, right? For starters, while that system was conceived to nurture innovation, right now it is impeding it, and it desperately needs an overhaul. And just like great tech, great brands, great franchises, they require capable hands. And we've all seen this, right? Good team, good sequel. Not so good team, well, good luck, right? In other words, great proprietary tech and IP cannot make a great game without great developers. But conversely, great developers can make a great game from scratch, right? And they do. In fact, the overwhelming majority of the most successful video game franchises of all time were original. Yet as an industry, we often treat our people as the commodity, and we default to our franchises as sort of the precious assets, and that's such the wrong way for us to look at it, right? And this dovetails into a separate and, albeit maybe more subtle issue tied to conventional financial valuation and accounting, because these often lead companies and investors to value the wrong stuff. So accounting rules define standardized line items for accounting for the value of a company's assets, right? Our property, our equipment, our intangible assets like our goodwill and our IP and our technology and you name it. And companies get credit for these assets, and they are literally tracked to the penny, and that helps drive valuation and stock price. So while essentially this is really where the scorekeeping is happening. And these rules and what gets tracked is governed by the FASB, right? The Financial Accounting Standards Board. And interestingly, there's no line item that ascribes value to a company's ability to attract, to inspire, to retain, talent, which I'm standing here arguing is by far and away the single most important predictor of a company's long-term success in games. And so, for example, if our core leaders at all of our respective companies, our core leaders and our core craftspeople, were to just suddenly disappear at our respective studios, our prospects and our potential would be vastly different, right, than they are today. And we couldn't just replace them overnight or in 6 months or in 2 years. And interestingly, our balance sheet and our financial statements would look no less healthy to investors. If anything, they might look more healthy, right? Our margins would be improved. And I believe that this contributes to a systemic undervaluation of talent and teams by investors and boardrooms in our industry, which leads to us placing too much emphasis on the wrong things. So just to illustrate, here's one of my favorite examples of where people, plain and simple, are creating incredible value. So when Valve set out to design their now iconic art style for TF2, there was no formula, right? It was simply a great team, and they actually deliberately set out to draw their inspiration from places that were completely outside of video games, right? They drew inspiration from golden age illustrators such as, Leyendecker and Cornwell and Norman Rockwell And they were inspired by comic book artists like Mike Mignola, which is where you see that really bold, silhouetted character shape language. And it's all set in a world that is inspired by Dust Bowl era farms and industry, right? And anyone who played TFC or remembers Team Fortress Classic, this was not the obvious route to innovate and create the sequel here. This was creativity and innovation. And the results speak for themselves. The game was truly a work of art. And this kind of creativity, this kind of innovation, it only happens when people carve a new path through disciplined exploration, through risk-taking, right? Through trial and error. And successes are almost always preceded by a litany of failures, right? Failure is almost like an important part of the road to success in innovation, right? And there's a lot of chaos and a lot of unpredictability in what we do in game development. And creating games is primarily knowledge work, and I think that's a relevant distinction because knowledge work is fundamentally different from task work, right? So as game makers, we're facing new problems every day. And unlike the manual work that dominated the last century as countries industrialized, knowledge work can't just be subdivided until there's no more autonomy left in the work, right? So in game development, we have to figure out how to solve new problems, unforeseen problems, on our own. No supervisor, no boss figure can solve the myriad of challenges that our work puts in front of us. So in order to innovate, in order to do cool things, in order to do things that players haven't seen before at a scale that they haven't really imagined before, and it requires sort of a shift in the mindset and in the balance of power away from the sort of stereotypical supervisor type towards creating an environment, an environment where people who are really exceptional at their respective crafts can collaborate really effectively. And being a manager of knowledge work requires a different mindset, right? Rather than tasking people with kind of a mindless portion of the overall job, managers have to become something of a sort of a support, hybrid coach, motivational leader. And this quote I think captures it really, really well. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up the men to gather the wood, divide the work, give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. And on the topic of modern management, some folks fall into the trap of thinking, the more people we grow to manage, the more people work for us, right? And that's backwards. The more people we grow to manage, the more people as managers we work for, the more people whose success we take responsibility for, right? That's the role of the modern manager. And interestingly, this perspective, in our experience, has made it less common for people to want to be on the management track, to sort of opt into that. And that's a good thing, right? Because God forbid any of us have a manager that doesn't really want to be one, right? And that self-selection is critical. And for that to happen, it's also critical that we have non-management tracks that are equally rewarding. So if the quality of a team is a game company's holy grail, then how much of it is team and how much of it is talent? Well, this is the 2004 USA men's national basketball team. And these guys were stacked, right? This was talent, stacked on talent, stacked on talent. You got LeBron, you got Dwayne Wade, you got Carmelo Anthony, you got Duncan, Iverson. And this would have been the highest paid team in the history of pro sports, right? But does anyone remember what happened in Athens, right? They got dumped on by Puerto Rico. And then they lost subsequent games to Lithuania and Argentina. I mean, they weren't supposed to lose a single game. They were supposed to run the entire table to the gold medal. They were massive favorites, right? So while talent can win you games, it is teamwork that wins championships. And I refuse to change this slide, by the way. I thought about it after Sunday's game, but come on. Run the ball. Sorry. And speaking of teams, Ed Catmull, who is the president and the co-founder of Pixar, has this wonderful quote, and I'm just going to share it with you guys. If you give a good idea to a mediocre team, they'll screw it up. If you give a mediocre idea to a great team, they'll either fix it or make something better. That's why people matter. This is so important. So this, of course, begs the question of how these people and teams come together. And I'm going to share a bit about kind of what we do, but take it with a grain of salt because we're still learning. We're making tons of mistakes, and different circumstances require different tactics and different flavors. But we tend to hire for passion and potential. So as some might call it, attitude and aptitude. But they're just a starting point. So we look for autodidacts, people who are curious, who love to learn, and who will teach themselves. We look for resilience, so people who can get knocked down and not shatter, right? And we look for ambitiousness, we call it, a blend of humility and ambition, right? People who are humble enough to realize the ways in which they and we as a company can get better, but still nurture that burning desire to accomplish big things. And experience is great, but it's risky. It can be overrated, right? So if you're familiar with Moneyball, it's the true story of how the Oakland A's determined that certain stats in baseball, like RBIs, were an overrated predictor of a player's value to their team. And we try to be careful not to put an overemphasis on experience. So to illustrate, imagine for a second you're a college football coach, and you're trying to build your program. And you're searching for your starting running back next year, and you've got two choices, right? One is this 4-star recruit from Texas. He was bred to play football. He'd been playing since Pop Warner when he was 8 years old, and he runs a 4.6 40-yard dash. You got this other candidate who was this passionate and smart kid from South Africa who's actually coming to your school on a track scholarship. He's built like an NFL player. He runs a 4.2 40. He's tough as nails, but he's never played a day of football in his life. He did grow up playing rugby, and he's really excited to learn. What do? If you're confident in your program, you don't take the football player, you take the athlete. Because 6 months into your program, he's going to be running circles around the other guy because he'll have learned your office and he'll have it down. And translate this into games for a second, right? We've got tons of candidates these days who have grown up passionate about games their whole lives, but for whatever reason, they haven't thought of it as a career. And they've gone and they've done other things, and they've considered, they're starting to consider it. Don't pass on these guys, right? If they've been exceptional at whatever else it is that they've been doing, and they have that deep passion for games, don't pass on them. And I just want to give you an example of one of these guys. So late last year, we hired a person with no experience in the games industry whatsoever to lead our entire talent and development efforts. Are we crazy? I'll let you guys be the judge, and I'll just share some details. So he's got an impressive resume. He was most recently the co-head of people at Starbucks. And among other things, he helped pioneer this sort of bold program that gave a free college education to every person that worked at the company, including baristas. And he accomplished all this at a relatively young age, before he turned 40. And here's what really caught our attention, though. like most of the rest of our leadership team, he's a hardcore gamer. And he grew up wanting to be a comic book artist, and he's passionate about gaming. Right? In fact, he was a semi-professional Magic the Gathering player. And over the span of 5 years, he literally wrote a featured weekly column about deck building on the MTG website. So he was legit. And he got this email his first week on the job, and it was shared with me, and I saved it because I just thought it was awesome. And I'm going to read it to you guys. Hey, Jay, I hope this doesn't come off as creepy fangirl, but I just wanted to say thanks. When I was in middle school, I was the lonely nerd type and a burgeoning Magic nerd. And your Magic articles were always my favorite. I'd stay up late enough for the WotC site to update. You had an impact on me, even if you didn't know it. I'm glad to have you join Riot. Naomi. This is a letter to our HR VP, who's getting fan mail. Like, that's exactly the kind of person that we think we can trust to lead our people efforts. So we bet on guys like Jay, athletes who might have zero industry experience, but are full of that authentic passion and potential. And as an aside, when Jay came for his interview, you could just tell he was a kid in a candy store. He was like seeing concept art on the walls, and he was freaking out, and he was seeing developers and designers were talking about cool stuff. And he sent me an email afterwards, and he said, hey, I don't know where this has been all my life. I've never been to a game studio, but I feel like I've been reunited with my tribe. And that's exactly like the kind of people that we want, right? And it's because cultural alignment matters so much. It's not just enough to find talented people, right? So, we like to think of ourselves as a company that's made a promise to players that we're going to treat them well. And we've found that the best way to be a company that authentically treats players well is to be a company of players. And by hiring gamers and rarely making exceptions to that rule, we have a better chance of being a team that natively speaks the language of gamers and that shares a common set of values and beliefs and behaviors. And I want to show you, I'm just going to sort of share a story of a fairly recent mistake that will help illustrate where that principle can sort of fall over. And real quick setup, as many of you are aware, esports are a growing part of certain game experiences, including League. And we never set out to run events at this scale. In major sporting centers with professional salaried teams and all sorts of players tuning in to watch. The response to our early efforts was a delight because this was our dream, but it was also a huge surprise in terms of like the scale of the response. And so we had to rush to get a lot of things in place. And one of those things was professional player contracts, which typically run about 100 pages. And we made the mistake of allowing some legal language to overreach, right? And the effect was that we contractually forbid our pro players from streaming competitor games. And so if you're a lawyer advising us about sports from the NBA or the NFL, you might be wondering, hey, what's the big deal, right? Michael Jordan isn't like, wearing Reeboks at halftime. Why is it a big deal to ask that league pros not promote competitive games, during their downtime between matches? And yet, when the contract was leaked, I mean, it was chaos. Riot was criticized heavily by not just the pros, but by all of our players and by each other, right? In fact, here's some quotes from our own intranet where there were dozens of concerned comments. I'm just going to read 2 of them for you. So honestly, I'm surprised by this. It feels like a betrayal of the values that we all believe in. In this case, I feel we need to grit our teeth, we need to put things right, and be prepared to eat humble pie for a while. It'll hurt, but it's the Riot thing to do. And one more, just for fun. I'm not convinced in the slightest that this is the correct course of action. We are, at our core, gamers who make the games that we want to play. How can an authentic group of gamers think that strong-arming our core community advocates and players is acceptable? How can we honestly look in the mirror and say, what we're doing is player-focused? we should try to win over player loyalty with gratitude, not with contracts and legal bindings. And they're totally right. I mean, streaming is a significant source of income for pros, right? And the reason that people tune in to watch these guys play is to be entertained. And we're hurting their ability to hold viewer interest in between matches and entertain themselves, right? We weren't living up to our aspiration to really champion the player's perspective. So more player focus might have prevented this out-of-character language from ever making it past the draft phase. But these sorts of decision points, they happen all the time, especially at scale, in all functions, all over the company. And the difference between a great decision and an awful decision is sometimes separated by like the thinnest layer of nuance that is, imperceptible if you're not a hardcore gamer yourself, right? So we have to be able to trust in our ability to make the right calls all over the place. So alignment is critical, whether I'm someone who's responsible for reviewing a contract that governs our relationship with pro players, or I'm over here, I'm an artist that's making a painful call to scale back the amount of polys in this gorgeous model that I'm working on to maximize performance. Or I'm in the network operations team, and I'm making sure that I'm allocating servers based on minimizing player ping before I'm sort of minimizing my operational overhead or complexity, right? Cultural alignment beats the heck out of rule books, right? Cultural alignment is way better than rule books. And deep alignment on values and behaviors helps ensure that we're all rowing in the same direction. And it requires a set of complementary systems that kind of reinforce our company's culture, right? So from the hiring process, where again, we rarely make exception to the rules that we hire only gamers, to our onboarding, to our performance reviews, et cetera, we try to reinforce our values and our alignment everywhere we can. Why? Because alignment allows that person in Santa Monica to trust that her colleagues in Sao Paulo or in Istanbul or anywhere around the world are coming from that same place of passion for games and care and empathy for players. Whoops. Because weak culture, can allow people to just drift. And a strong culture can sort of act as this membrane that keeps large, diverse groups of people working in alignment, right? And if they start to drift, they get pulled right back in, right? And trust is the absolute foundation of teamwork, right? And being able to sort of default to a position of trust with your colleagues enables teams to focus on satisfying players rather than playing some kind of politics, right? And the other reason that trust matters is it enables autonomy, right? So researchers, like Dan Pink, have talked about the link between autonomy and sort of satisfaction in the work that we do. But true autonomy only really happens when people trust each other. And it's really easy to allow someone else to make a decision when you trust that, that she shares your values and beliefs. And every company has a culture, right? Whether they acknowledge it and are deliberate about it or not. Culture is sort of this living, breathing, evolving idea, and it takes consistent effort over time to synthesize, to codify, and then ultimately to teach. And I love this analogy, and I'm just gonna take a survey real quick. But who in this audience is like me? And you raise your hand if you really like black licorice. Okay, handful of you guys. All right, a lot of people right there. Now, who in this audience looks at this image like, that is freaking disgusting? I hate black licorice. Okay, tons of you guys. Now, who in this audience is like really ambivalent? Oh, black licorice, whatever, have it sometimes. Okay, very few of you, right? Now, who in this audience is ambivalent about vanilla ice cream? You don't hate it. It's not the first thing you order at Baskin-Robbins either. Okay, almost everyone, right? And that's kind of the difference here. As a culture, you don't want to be plain vanilla, right? You don't want to be a catch-all flavor that is something for everyone, right? That's dangerous. It just waters down your culture. You want to be black licorice. You want to be cilantro. You want to be uni. You want to be Brussels sprouts. You want to stand for something, right? And then you'll be a magnet for cultural fits. And others will self-select out. And I'm just going to walk you through some examples of different types of cultures that mean something, right? So these are the Marines, and they have a very specific culture. It's around, they sort of take pride in being first to the fight. And their culture revolves around values like honor and courage and commitment, right? And these are great values, particularly for military action. Maybe not so great for transparency of healthy debate and friction and openness and those kinds of things, right? This is The Godfather, right? Hopefully everyone's familiar. It was a video game at one point. This is a good representation of a hierarchical culture, right? Extremely hierarchical, where trust and respect and loyalty are paramount, right? And it's great for organized crime. It is probably not so great for fostering creativity. And here's another one. This is Initech, right? An example of crushing bureaucracy, right? Where managers are arguing over the use of freaking staplers and cover sheets and whatever else. Probably not good for anything other than, comedy, right? The point here is that moving to a values-based culture that stands for something empowers teams and individuals to operate with trust, with autonomy, and with fearlessness. And, it's been a humbling 9 years since Marc Merrill and I started Riot Games. And one thing's for certain, we definitely didn't understand all this stuff out of the gates on day one. Our evolution as a company has been an iterative process riddled with mistakes and lessons learned that continue to this day. And it's really just like game R&D, I think, from that perspective. But for us and many of you, the only real constant, the only real value driver at the end of the day was the quality of our collaboration. It's not our IP, right? Some people, ask us sort of how to define this. It's like, we didn't have IP, right? We built it, and while we take some pride in our game and our characters and our world, it's benefited from constant focus, and it still needs a lot of work, right? It's not our tech. Right? Initially, we had none of that either, and we had to build everything from scratch, and then pretty much rebuild it again for scale. And so we've built most of the plane kind of in midair while it's flying, and some of it's great, and some of it's still rickety. And it's certainly not our business model, right? Business models are not proprietary. If we had put League in a box and we had charged, $60 for it as a sort of a no-name developer with this wacky new game in this new genre, I certainly wouldn't be standing here. I'd probably still be sneaking in somewhere. But at the same time, a free, if we give everything away for free, it cannot save a game that doesn't excite players. So at the end of the day, in the hierarchy of company value, people trumps all. And we're all blessed, right? We're all blessed because for the vast majority of us, making awesome games is our dream job, right? Our dream job. And on top of that, we're blessed because, it continues to be one of the fastest growing industries in the whole media and entertainment world, right? While others have contracted. But to continue to be an innovative industry, to continue to create the kinds of great things that we have on the horizon, we have to be a magnet for great talent, and we shouldn't be underperforming adjacent industries on the people front. And part of appreciating talent is understanding it. And if we let our leaders or our boardrooms or investors view game companies through that sanitized, oversimplified lens of basic financial statements, then we're missing the most important part, the most critical part of the long-term equation, right? So the bottom line is, as leaders helping to shape our industry, like our people decisions need the same level of care, they need the same level of effort and creativity that we apply to our development decisions and our business decisions. In fact, most of the time, they need more. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.